I'm John and my wife Liz, and we're living on Parku at
52 Motorhoe Road.
52 Motorhoe Road, and we've lived here for 40 years so far.
Your parents had a batch at Waihi Beach.
Worked out we've been here for 45 years, wasn't it?
Yes, you have.
Yeah, so take that on. Not sure of the date. It's lost in here somewhere.
So what brought you to Tairua?
Well, diving.
Diving?
I've been diving since 1958. And sort of got into the early diving and knew all the old time divers and took them lots of places. And so Tairua was the place to come because it's so good to... I started diving in Bowen Town down at Tairua Harbour in 1958, and I realised that the Coromandel coast to the north was the way to go. And my mate in those days had a 1926 Chevy car, which you can imagine, and so we headed north and got as far as Opito, diving off the beaches and all the way up. Catch a sack of crays every time we went in the water, no trouble. But Tairua stood out as being the place to come because it didn't have to go way to hell up north. This was close enough, and the best of it was right here. And so 45 years later I'm still here. Yeah, the only thing from our point of view is Tairua was a leaving place. We came here because it was a good place to leave to go to other places. Bit unusual for most people here. But after a while I realised that what you needed was a bigger and better boat to get there. So we started off with just a little speedboat thing, water skiing boat. So I built a bigger one, built an 18-foot version. And with that we went places we shouldn't have gone probably, to the Aldermans many times, and find we're the only boat out there. Not at all uncommon. And only once out of all the trips did we have to call for help. And we called up Don Sweet, who was the garage proprietor at the time, and they had the shipped ashore radio in the workshop there. And he happened to hear it go off. And he was as surprised as I was that we got through. And so they called up a fellow called Joe Tomlin, who's an old identity around here, way older than us. Died recently, unfortunately. And he had a boat very similar to mine with the same engine, and he put it in the water and came out and found us about halfway to the Aldermans, and towed us in. And that was the start of a long association with Joe. Become my best friend, and he could do anything he used to do. He did a lot of filming, and he's very well known. Joe and his wife Ruth. Joe died at about age 94 or something, 96, and his poor wife, who used to get a hard time with all Joe's mad ideas, went to 103. And we lost her recently. So Joe helped me with a lot of boat building, and the problem I found with them is I always needed a bigger one. But so in 1964 I built this house on Parku, not this house, sorry, around on near the
Pacific Drive.
Yeah, number 6. I built that out of recycled timber from commercial building in Hamilton, and cost very little. And in those days only about half a dozen people living on Parku, and I moved here with my 3 boys in '64. And they enjoyed it, but it was a long way to school. So in those days I used to drive them down to school and pick up their push bikes on the back of a little car. And in those days the government would pay you a bit of a recompense for driving the kids to school. It was amazing. I'd get my groceries all the way. So the boys thought it was great living up here. It was like living on a farm. We used to have, in fact, cattle ranging around the hill, and they'd come in and eat your garden. It was like a farm. anyway, the one exciting thing was one day we were fishing out at Shoe Island with the boys, and we came around the corner of the island to come back and said, "Oh shit, Parky's on fire!" And the whole of the secondary hill was blazing, going up, it was blowing 40 knots from the southwest, and the flames were just going like amazing. And so we tore up and got out the boat on the trailer and climbed up the hill, and here was the fire brigade coming, because they'd been having their Christmas do that particular afternoon down at the fire station, and the fire alarm went off, and they were all on. Oh, nothing better than a Christmas do and a fire same day. And the flames were higher than the big pine trees that are still here now. And my house was, when we were living in Pacific Drive round there, my house was just where the fire started, just behind us. So the people were saying, "It's your kids that set the fire." I said, "They're lucky I had them all with me in the boat." So it wasn't our kids, it was the kids up the road. I remember still being in my wetsuit when we came up and helped put out the fire. I remember being on the end of a hose hanging off a cliff, and I'm thinking, this is a funny place to be wearing a wetsuit. Anyway, by that period I'd built Tairua. Now that means something to a lot of our locals here. A 40-foot launch which I used for chartering to dive clubs from as far as Mare Island and right up north to the Three Kings Islands. It had a huge engine, used a hell of a lot of diesel, and the Pacific Islands were beckoning us. So first I had to build a boat shed, and then I built a 50-foot yacht, ably assisted by Neil the hippie Wernham, known by a lot of people here, now living in Raglan. We launched Blackadder in 1989 after 2.5 years full-time work. Then it was off sailing to the tropics, north to PNG and Solomons, south to Fiordland, east to Chatham Islands and west to Australia. Blackadder sold in 2003, and I realised buying instead of building boats was quicker. So I bought a 36-foot yacht in the British Virgin Islands in the Caribbean and sailed back to Tairua. Liz enjoyed the sailing trip and encouraged me to do it again, but this time from Europe. So Antipodes was bought in Italy, and 18 months saw us back in Tairua again. That's the prices were really pretty quick trip, 18 months. So then I realised I should be talking more about Tairua. So early times, I remember spearfishing off the north end of Tairua Beach, just in off the sand, waist deep water, and I shot a 20-pound snapper just right beside like that. And another to the other extreme, I tail roped a 960-pound black marlin just off Shoe Island that had been caught by Roy McNabb and was dead on the bottom after an 8-hour fight. And it was at 170 foot deep where we finally found it and put a rope around its tail and managed to haul it up. And as I say, it weighed in at 960 pounds. So I've covered both sorts of sides of fishing. And that's as far as I got when you turned up with the camera. Okay. Well, we have now dived a lot of the Pacific Coral Islands and done a lot of coral diving. And I did chartering on the big yacht up to New Guinea and Solomons, and took geologist parties and marine biologists a couple of times. American marine biologists for one fairly long trip up around Solomons, and they paid quite good money compared with what I used to get paid down here. So that was all good.
But I would say at the Aldermans, your favourite place would be McGregor's Rock, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, we dived the Aldermans in the very early days of diving. And I got into scuba diving fairly early on when we sort of had homemade regulators that were friends of ours, were Bill and John Gallagher of Gallagher Engineering and Electronics now. And they built their own regulators and sold them. I go back further than that. I had mates that made their own flippers out of sand shoes with plywood nailed on, but I can't admit to doing that. Yeah, we had buoyancy compensators that we made out of life jackets and things. So it was early times of diving. Really good. Well, of the tropical diving, by far the best is Papua New Guinea islands thereof, and Solomon Islands is good. But to go to Fiji and dive with the tourists, not for me. Done it, but no, we used to get way out in places no one else had ever been. That was pretty good. I've got a couple of videos made. I had a very good diving friend who was TV cameraman for TVNZ, so he had a pretty upmarket sort of an underwater video camera, and that's the result there.
Oh, nice.
I'll give it to you later to take home and show.
So, your favourite diving place within this region?
Around here, John.
Around here, Alderman's for sure.
Which part of the Oldies?
Well, we used to dive all the outlying pinnacles, some of them like 30, 40 feet down, but they'd come up out of 200 feet of water, and we would land on those, go over the edges and go to the bottom. In those days we used to dive to 200 feet quite regularly. It went out of fashion a bit after a while.
It meant you went to the dive chamber.
Yeah, I ended up in the dive chamber once for the bends, but it wasn't out at those ridiculous deep dives. It was only up at the Great Barrier and maybe 100 feet of water. Wasn't it? That's where
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Yes, I remember Liz being the doctor rang up the Marine Nautical Chamber up at Devonport Naval Base and said, my husband's had a bit of a stiff leg, and where was it, mostly the arm or something?
Arm, I think.
Yeah, he'd been diving and his arms are all aching, and and they said, well, where'd he dive? Oh, up at Great Barrier, about 100 feet catching crows. Get
Wasn't
up
it the
here and-
Mokihinas?
Oh, I've been to Mokihinas too. Yeah, we've been away for a week. And of course we left it 3 or 4 days before it was inquired why I was still aching. And they said, get up here now. And so Liz drove us to Auckland, and they chucked me in a bed and put me in the chamber. It's just a standard procedure, 6 hours in the chamber, slowly coming up and back into bed for the night. And in the morning, they said, how are you feeling? And I said, oh, I was so embarrassed about all this. Here I was commercially taking divers, and I'm getting myself in the chamber. So they said, oh, you're feeling all right today? And I said, oh, look, it's marvellous. Thanks very much for everything you've done. They said, oh, good, we weren't that sure you had the bends, but seeing you're improved, you must have. So we'll put you back in for another day. So back we went in, and when I got out next time, I said, oh, it feels about the same as when I went in. And they said, oh, well, you must have stabilised. We'll let you go home now. So, yeah.
So what about fishing in the early days?
Well, the snappers off the beach and marlin just out on the close island here. I, of course, did a heck of a lot of spear fishing and salt and ordinary fishing. And I've sort of got off all that as I've got older. I don't bother spear fishing anymore, and I've even stopped fishing. I've seen the fishing go from what I thought was excellent, but my older brother used to think the fishing was had it. And now I look out and say, man, it's had it. But strangely enough, there's been a bit of an uprise in snapper fishing currently, because we used to see the trawlers going back forward just outside Shoe Island, and right down to Barntown and Mount, just off the beach. Well, luckily that's been stopped long ago. Even though people would say it's the bloody Japs coming in. Well, it wasn't really, they were doing stuff further out, but they don't come down anymore either. We came back on one trip from Fiji, I think it was, and we noticed a boat way out past Muir Island, and it was blowing 60 knots. It was a bit of a blow, all right, and we were sort of enjoying it. It was over our shoulder, we were hooping along, and we called them up, and they didn't ever answer, but we could hear them talking in some foreign language, sounded Chinese to me. I think they were Japanese, but Yeah, but they don't come down anymore now.
Mm.
So the fishing has improved slightly, but it's still nothing like it used to be when we were kids and young fellas. You know, go and fill your boat with snapper, just one after the other, 3 at a time.
Mm.
And that's probably why there's not so many now, but it's more likely the commercial fish.
But he hasn't mentioned his most exciting experience coming back in a storm rapidly built up.
Well, that's a fishing story and a yachting story and all in one. If you go far enough out here, like 160 miles straight out that way, you'll come to a pinnacle that comes up out of 3,000 feet of water, and it comes up to about 120 feet. We never dived it, even that stopped us. So it was good fishing. You'd catch, we took the boat out with 3 or 4 keen rod fishermen, and they'd all latch on big harp hook or groper all at once, all down the side of the boat, and I got a picture of them, all rods all bending over, hauling up these great big bloody groper. And we did that once a year for 3 or 4 or 5 years, until the last one, weather wasn't too bad, and we got all the way out there, fished all that day, headed home that night and spent the night sailing back. And by about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, it's getting up, isn't it? And it was huge. Swells had come out of virtually nowhere, it seemed like. They were just from here to way over there and out to there, and we were going sort of with them. They were coming over our shoulder, and one did. It broke right above us and crashed down on top of the boat. It's a 50-foot boat, 20-ton boat, and just bowled it over on its flat, put the mast underwater. Called a knockdown, and that was pretty exciting. Goes out of the cockpit windows, cabin windows, knocked them out and filled the boat up with water up to about here, a lot of water, and put all the electronics and that out of order, and the motor. Actually, the motor started up on its own, and we thought that was funny, but said we were all panicking a bit. We checked there was nobody missing, and one of them had come up from underneath, said, "Bloody hell, I can't swim, and I'm under the table full of water. I'm trying to swim under the table. A stupid place to learn to swim," he thought. Anyway, the story goes on a bit. So we headed back in. Sailing, we could get sail up, and we sailed. We were sailing pretty well. I think we only had the headsail up, and we're doing 9 knots with the wind coming over our shoulder. It was pretty good until the big wave hit us and bowled us over, and she came up full of water. The wave knocked me over the tide too. I was back over at the back of the boat in the water, but I'd had to put a harness on, which we always did if it was too rough. And so I was being towed along, 9 knots with my head down the water. I pulled myself back to the boat on the harness, and it was still over on its side, so I was pretty quick. And I managed to just come in over the rail, and next thing I was hanging onto the steering wheel again, and we were still doing 9 knots, probably a bit less than that. And so we sorted ourselves out and bailed the boarder out, but it took quite a while, the old bucket story, plus a couple of little pumps, and we got it pretty near out, and realised there was no way we were going to get into Tairua. That was about 100 miles out, or 80 miles out here, when it knocked us over. So we came back in anyway and went over to Slipper, and sure enough it was calm on the inside of Slipper. And we put the anchor down there, and then it puffed and it blew even more. It was later recorded at 60 knots, and 8 metre swells were recorded at A buoy down at Tairua. So it was doing the same thing here, I tell you. And so we realised that we were dragging back and we were heading right for the Watchman Rocks, and they were just a white mass. So we didn't like the look of that. So we pulled up the anchor and couldn't get the... No, we had no motor, so we had no winch for pulling it up. And so we buoyed it and dropped it, and then put sail up and sailed Well, the motor wouldn't go then. It started off on its own, but that was because the ignition was all full of salt water and it connected up and made it go. But then it stopped pretty quick because when the boat's under, the mast's underwater, it had picked up the vent from the fuel tank, and when it stood up, it had about a 20-foot head of water pressure that filled the water straight into the fuel tank. So by starting up, it got rid of the fuel that was ready to go, and the rest of it come to, and she had the impeller pump drive off. So that wasn't ever going to go again. So we sailed to get out of the storm up into the South Bay at Swipper, or the bigger bay, and put the anchor down there and got the cup of coffee going. That'd be a good idea too. And yeah, but then we got blew off the beach and we're going back out. Going to miss Watchman this time, just go on the cliffs instead. And so we start up again, and we could pull that anchor up. It was a secondary anchor I had, and it was easy enough to hand pull it up. Get sailing again, up and down, then tacking up into the South Bay again, because the wind was coming out of there, so it's this way and this way, and in we went, put the anchor down the second time, blow out. Third time, and I said, this is getting dicey, you know, we'll end up on those rocks and there'll be someone dead. So we better just run up on the beach. So sailed it in as fast as we could and straight up onto the beach crawl, and it lay over a little bit and we never moved, but we were still worried, so we went ashore and took a long rope and looked for a tree in South Bay to tie to. The biggest trees in South Bay are lupins about this high. So the boys, I got a picture of them kneeling on the beach by hand, digging a hole in the sand, and then chucked the anchor in there and filled it up with sand and jumped on it. And that sort of held us until some of them walked across the hill to the farmhouse there and got the tractor to come over, and he dug himself into the beach and we transferred the rope onto that and stayed overnight. The mate and I stayed on the boat, and the others all went and stayed in the farmhouse. But in the night the boat was banging on the water, on the bottom, bang, 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 bang. And yeah, she wasn't ever going to go again, so we called up and got John Norman, another well-known local, who came out in his boat a day later when it calmed down enough to get him out. And he towed us in, and big insurance claim. In those days big anyway, $80,000. And it saved me going to Campbell Island anyway. I had a charter to go to Campbell Island, which I was a bit dicey about going. They wanted me to sail from here down around East Cape, pick them up at Dunedin, go to Campbell Island. I was stupid enough to think we'd give it a go. And this happened, and I had to ring them up and said, well, we're not going, the boat's full of water, everything's stuffed. I was really relieved, I tell you.
So what happened to the boat?
Oh, the engine had to be, new injectors and everything for the engine, but all the electronics and radios and sat navs and GPSs were all stuffed. So I was able to buy all them and install them all myself. So I saved the insurance quite a bit of money. On the other hand, I got the job done because I built the boat originally, so I preferred rebuilding it myself. When I first came here, you could catch harpooker just out off the north end of Shoe, a place called North Reef, and an old local long before my time had gone out there in some old boat, him and his mate, and pulled up harpooker till they couldn't pull them up anymore. They got pictures somewhere of them then. So I turned up later and I speared a harpooker just off Shoe Island one time. And there was plenty out at the Alderman, and the reefs outside the Alderman, you could catch harpooker still. And John Norman still go out there and catch them, but he goes a bit further out. And that's what's happened. I snorkeled crays right off the Needle at Parkoo. I remember diving there once and found two funny things. I found a cray hole that was full of golf balls, And that
Full of
turned
what, sorry?
Golf balls. That was Jim Hope lives on the cliff just above there. He'd come back with a heap of golf balls and fire them out to sea. And they all dropped down in the movement of the sea and shoved them all into this hole. I couldn't believe it. And the other thing was I came around, swum out of that hole and around a big bluff of rock and bang, straight into a great big stingray, and he come and hit me, boom, and I nearly died of fright, and he, I think, nearly died as well, because he turned around and flapped his way and went straight into the cliff he was going round and bounced off that again and took off. That was a bit unusual. Yeah, I've had a lot of excitement with stingrays. One chased me when I was a young boy and kept coming up and banging into my feet. I've never heard anyone have that sort of problem ever since. Yeah, no fright. I was only about 16.
No.
Yeah. Okay, enough, surely.
No. Very interesting. I've thoroughly enjoyed your stories.
Yeah, I can tell.
You're a very good storyteller.
He's a good raconteur.
It's great to have it recorded, I've got to say. Because honestly, it's obviously what I'm saying now is not going to be recorded, and I've got to stop it anyway.
Okay, well, enough about diving and fishing, surely. To make ends meet, of course, I was a builder, so I built my own house around in Pacific Drive. I think it cost about $13,000. I think that included the section, which was $3,000. And it was all second-hand building materials. And I remember getting a first... I applied and got a building permit for the building, and they gave me that after a while. Just drew a bit of a story on the back of the A4 paper, bit of a picture of it. And yeah, come time I'd heard about having to have a building inspection for building in Tairua. So I rang the Thames building department and got somebody who was a bit puzzled that said, finally he said, well, where are you building? I said, well, it's up on Parku. Oh, he says, that'll be all right. That's all rock up there. No, carry on. And that was my building inspection. 57 or something. Yeah. So then I moved over here and lived in the house that I built in Pacific Drive, and worked part-time really for Bren Plender. He was a well-known builder, the only builder in those days, and worked for him, and we built quite a number of houses mainly. I think one was a church in Paanui that I think we built. But I was always sort of part-time, so I can't claim that I built many of those houses as such, because I was always going off boating, as you've heard. Yeah, so then I started spec building on Parku and built this house we're sitting in here. This was quite a challenge, on a very steep slope, and ended up 3 stories high, but luckily you can drive into the top story. A bit unusual, can't drive into the bottom one. Yeah, that's served us well. And Liz has enjoyed the garden. Still enjoys it, but it's a bit harder nowadays. It's quite steep. So as a base here, then I bought a section in Oceana in Parku, and built a spec house on there. I got an architect to design a place this time, yeah, built all that. Well, this house, the first house was $3,000 for the section, another 10 for the building. That was a bit extreme, I'll admit. But then when I started spec building, so this section you're standing on was $83,000. Sold to a guy in Singapore, who I rang up, and he said, well, what's it worth? And I said, I think about 80 grand. And he said, I'll get back to you. And he came back and said, I think 85. So I said, well, what about 83? And he said, okay. And then that was the house. Which house was that? No, that was this one. Yeah. Yeah, well, this cost a couple $100 grand to build, 3-story house. And then I started building them on speculation down in Oceana. And I'm scratching my head now what they cost. But we had we got to know an Australian couple who'd come over here and were renting a house here, loved Parku and Tairua, and eventually sold the first house I built down there to them. I think I got 650,000 or something for it. That was about all. I was a bit brassed off because I'd worked like hell for a year and a half to build it, and it wasn't a lot of money in those. Then the Australian guy was so loved the place that he bought. I bought the section below him, right beside him, to do another spec house, and so I sold him the idea, and he bought the section. That's right, I think. And I said, I'll build the house, you bought the section, and when we sell up, we'll just do a pro rata on the amount of money spent. And that's more or less what we did, but he wanted out before we finished the thing, so I had to buy him out for the section, and that was 190,000, I think. Yeah. And we finished the house up and sold it up. Took a little while to sell, but I think I got 1.3 million for it. So things had moved on a bit from there. And that was my last one. I said, enough of that, carry on. Because in between all those houses, we were going off in the yacht to cruise the Pacific and the Atlantic at that stage. So that's where we had to work it in amongst working here as well.
Who were the important people in town when you arrived in town?
Well, I mentioned Bren Plender, the builder.
The Sweets. The Sweets owned
the Sweets were owned the garage. They were mechanics and owned the garage. I mentioned them. They had a simple old marine radio in the workshop that you could call up, but hardly ever used. So that helped us one time. And John Purdon was very well known in the district as the headmaster of the school. And my kids all went to the school there, and he taught them. And Ruth Lee, who was the junior teacher there for the kids.
Infant school teacher.
And a strange old lady, but very well thought of, and did a great job on the kids. And then they had another school teacher came, and he unfortunately died on the football field while he was refereeing a game. And Liz might be able to tell you more about that.
That was the worst experience of my life.
About Joe Tomlin.
Oh, crikey, I need a bit more thinking.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Joe had been a horologist in Wellington and had come up here and fallen in love with the place. But he realised once electric clocks arrived and electric watches that he would be out of a job. So he retired at 40 to come to Tairua and set up his workshop. I mean, he made all his tools because he's of an era when New Zealand didn't have many tool manufacturers. So, and in fact, all his tool making gear was collected by the Horological Society in Auckland and taken up to set up a museum. I don't know whether it's been done. Your turn now, Joe.
Yeah, that was when Joe died. Unfortunately, we weren't here when he went. We were up at Pitcairn Island. It's a place we'd gone on a ship because I never got there on yacht. So we took a supply ship up there and got the message that Joe had died. So it was something that was not good for me. So stories about old Joe. Oh, crikey. He once got contacted from Melbourne, from a company that used a ship, a tourist ship, to do trips around Australia. And they needed a cogwheel made to fit a fuel a meter so that the ship's master could tell how his fuel was going, you know, fuel gauge, basically. And it had it was a mechanical thing from way back, and it needed a new cogwheel, only about so big. And no one could make one. It had an unusual number of teeth or something. And Joe said, well, I have to make a thing to make a thing. So he made a thing to make a thing and made this thing. And then he told me before they had picked it up, he says, oh, it's a bit embarrassing. Crops took a bit of time. And so they come and got it. And some agent came and got it from him. And they asked how much, and Joe said, look, it's going to be $400. Well, it's been a heck of a lot of time on it. And the guy nearly fell down dead. He would have paid thousands for it. Keeping a bloody cruise ship in port. That was just...
Talking about Ruth Tomlin, and this is what's it when you've got a whole lot of photographs? A montage that her person looking after her made for her 98th birthday. And it shows Ruth was a war bride. Joe was in the RAF in Norfolk, and Ruth's father owned a farm in Norfolk, and she came out to New Zealand after the war in 1948 and was absolutely horrified at how benighted New Zealand was. And but she loved books, and she felt that she should start a library in Tairua. So she's at first the library was TCDC sending round a library, a van of books, and you change your books every 3 months, I think. And and then she really wanted to have a library in Tairua, and was behind starting, collecting money to get the library here. She lived till 102. She spent the last couple of years in Matapaya, but had lived in her own home till she was 98. Okay, I was born in the Orkney Islands because my father was in the Fleet Air Arm, and left the Orkney Islands at the age of 3 days, came down to Croydon where I spent the next 6 weeks in the cupboard under the stairs because of the bombs, and then went down to Somerset because the Fleet Air Arm, as you know, was based in Yeovilton. And we spent 9 years in a Somerset village, beautiful village, house where I developed my love of trees, because there was a sequoia, a yew, a weeping ash, a walnut tree, and hazelnuts. And that's the reason why I've planted 20 native trees around this section. Then the happiest time in my childhood was when we all went to Malta. My father was stationed there for 2 years, and we schooled there, and summer days you had school from 8 till 1, and then went swimming in the afternoon on the rock pools, and that was when I first learnt to snorkel. And then came back to boarding school. Had always wanted to be a doctor, although the government at the time said you've got to do maths, physics and chemistry, but so I obeyed with that. But then when I got my place at Oxford, I then did zoology till in the 6 months between finishing school and going to Oxford. Did physiology at Oxford, then went to the Middlesex Hospital for the remaining training, and then the very first time I took what's called a history as a medical student, the guy was a drayman, and he was in with liver problems because he'd consumed, I don't know, I think a barrel of beer a day. And and after I'd finished him telling me his story, he then said, "Thank you, nurse." And I thought, bloody hell. I'm a doctor, a medical student, and although I'm short, and so what was I going to say? I then went on. So I decided I'd be a children's doctor, a paediatrician, and I was so lucky with had a lovely consultant who worked both at Queen Elizabeth Hackney and Kent. QE2 Hackney is like the East End Great Ormond Street, and it was just amazing. We had children, Bangladeshi children, Orthodox Jews, Cockneys, and Turkish Cypriots, and it just taught you what an amazing number of people lived in London, nations lived in London.
British Empire.
And my most interesting experience was when a child came in with a very big liver and spleen, and I thought, this is malaria. And it was. The child, her father worked for London Zoo and had brought a monkey home, and the monkey had passed the malaria on to the child. And but anyhow, that was why I became a paediatrician. And I worked both in Kent and, as I said, QE2 Hackney, Southampton, Oxford, and then my mother had died by then of cancer of the breast, and my father was a New Zealander, and I felt he needed to come back to New Zealand to have the support of his relatives out here. And so I noticed this advert in the British Medical Journal for a job at Waikato, and came back to Waikato. And my dad, when I told him, said that I was in that hospital at the age of 12 with something called Henoch Schönlein purpura. And so we came out, and we lived first in a hospital house, and then it was on about the second long vacation that I had that I met John. And so
there you are.
So then I went.
And the rest is history.
Yes,
Yeah.
I went to the medical superintendent at Thames, and I said, "You need a paediatrician, don't you? You've got a population that'll take a paediatrician." And I was the one solo paediatrician for the area, but he only offered me a 6/10 post, and I knew if you're solo, you're never 6/10. So I went to the medical officer of health and said, "I'm going to be living on the Coromandel. You'll need a school doctor for the Coromandel, and it will save travel expenses if I'm the school doctor." So I had this fabulous job where I would go to Thames probably about 4 days a week, and then 1 day a month I'd go to each of do clinics in Whangamata, Whitianga, Ngatea, Coromandel, and the public health nurses. At that time, the public health nurses had a decent caseload, and the job was taken away from them when they were put into public health programs, and it lost its soul. So I would go with the public health nurse in the mornings and visit dysfunctional families and or children on correspondence way up the 309, and I just loved it. But after 20 years I developed, I think I was probably overtired, because I could have, it was just the idea of taking 6 months off for mastectomy, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and then coming back, and I just envisaged all the backlog of stuff I would have to read to keep up to date. So I retired. So what was really lovely was my father decided we would drive out to Malta. So at the age of 11, we drove out camping all the way through France and Italy, down across to Sicily, and then by boat from Sicily to Malta. And we arrived at Malta and stayed in a hotel in Slima till the house was ready in Halfar. And at that stage, Halfar was an airfield that I learnt to drive on at the age of 14. And it was just the most sociable time of our lives. There would be, as children, as I said, we went down on summer afternoons to go swimming, and we learnt life-saving, and so the school was as you probably know, it was Army, Navy and Air Force, the children there. And you tend to, I don't know what it is, but you tend to be able to pick out which child belonged to which service because of their behaviour. And the other thing that we really enjoyed was Mums got attached to a rambling group, and we went fossil hunting on the limestone rocks. What else did we do? Oh, we had a house in the garden that I made a hut, and you read stories and you want to, and I made a tunnel under the bottom of the hut to be an escape route. My poor older brother, my father decided that he needed to be at public school in Clifton, Bristol, and only come out for the summer holidays. And he really has resented that for the rest of his life, the fact that we enjoyed ourselves so much in Malta and he was only allowed to come for the holidays. I'm talking about May Finley, who was the postmistress. Everybody in town had post boxes, and she was in fact a retired nurse, but when I mentioned her name to John, he said, oh, she was the mother of the village, because she, whenever anybody had anything needing first aid, you went to May and she sorted you out. And her daughter now lives in Australia, but she used to babysit the boys because when I was working I didn't get back home till 7 and John didn't finish till 5, so May Finley's daughter would look after the boys between school ending and John getting home from work.
Okay, did she have a husband?
Yes. John remembers her husband better.
Yeah. Old Bill Finley was another old-time identity in the town. Had a bulldozer, and that's the sort of thing he did, was bulldoze things and fix things up. And of course, that sort of a guy had a workshop with a basic. To me, when I got here, anyone that had a bench with a vice on it, I wanted to know, because I couldn't do anything without putting something in a vice and fixing it. So I used a plumber for that, and old Bill Finley. He was good.
But his workshop was at the old mill, wasn't it?
Yeah, they lived in what's the old mill now, down by the marina there. and that really was an old mill then. One time I went in and there was no one living there, but the cats had moved in. There was 2 or 3 cats, and they went berserk. I guess I stirred them up a bit, and I swear one of them got up into that little tower that's part of the roof, and he seemed to me, I still see him running around the wall. I could see him so bloody wound up. Yeah, but anyway, that's Finley's. They were good people. A shell mill. It used to be a shell mill there. We grind up shell for making something. Cockles and pippies.
Oh, right.
You know, where all the marine subdivision is now,
Yep.
what do you call it, where they built all the units.
Yeah.
That was always there as a sand spit,
Right.
and it was just all solid shell. And so they built a mill there to mill it
Right.
up.
I didn't
So that
know-
would have
I didn't
been
know
way back, I don't know what.
So I've got floods and you flying into Pauanui at Easter.
Yeah, well, that was, I'd be over here and organise a trip, and I think it might have been Hamilton Doctors or something who would have had me chartered for a week, and it was worth making a bit of effort to get, because we're flooded in, like we often are now, and no one could drive in from Hamilton to here. But we could fly all right, so I had a friend that had a Cessna in Hamilton somewhere. So Liz arranged it and she flew in and landed at Pauanui, and then did I swim you across?
No, you rowed me
I
across.
might have had a dinghy. And got on the boat and went out because we could get out and go to sea all right, and went up to
Absolutely.
Great Barrier.
Oh, well, shall I talk to the photographs?
You can talk to the photographing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I met John on the wharf in Tairua in
1982, 82.
1982, because we were waiting. There'd been a storm, and I was working at Waikato at the time, and I was allowed 2 weeks holiday a year, and the first week I'd spent on the East Cape and had been uncontactable, and so I came back to Tairua in a storm, and John picked me up from the wharf, and we camped in.
I brought you home.
You brought you home, but then we went camping in up the Puketui because of the, with the boy. This is a photograph of our son Mark at Scout Camp up the Puketui, and he's got large amounts of muddy grass in his hands, about to throw them in a mud fight. But the Sweets, Don Sweet, was the scoutmaster, and so we had scouts and cubs for a few years until nobody was prepared to.
Oh, it was Sea Scouts, it was.
Sea Scouts.
It was officially a Sea Scout thing, and somehow they got hold of a couple of small sailing yachts, and you'd never get away with it now, but the kids could borrow it in their own time, and I'd sail off around Shoe Island. These kids are not even supposed to be on.
And this is our son Gary with one of the snapper that we've mentioned with the fishing, and this is his identical twin Pete, and this is us eating on Blackadder.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a picture of Parku. This is John's building that he mentioned. He built this is the house he built for the Australians, and this is the spec house that he built.
Right.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay.
Do we want to cover Mike and Sylvia Richardson?
I'm not sure what that's mentioned for.
Well, John didn't get into sports fishing to begin with, but Mike and Sylvia Richardson, they were the pharmacists here in the 1980s, and Mike got interested in doing sports fishing, so he chartered John to go out to the Aldermans to catch, and they minced up Burley. Where did you mince up Burley?
Yeah, so Mike took our boy Mark out as a junior angler, and they caught a lot of sharks, and they were pretty ordinary sort of sharks, but every time one got on they gave it to the boy to wind in, and it was all weighed in officially, and how many days it was a national competition. He won the thing, and
Because of his age.
well, he either won a push bike or he won enough money to buy a push bike, I think, $200. It was pretty good. Like I can claim the 900-pound black marlin as something I caught. We cut it in half to weigh it because it was so big.
Oh.
I don't think it got away.
Alan Moyner.
Moyner.
Yes. He was a retired naval doctor who's retired to Pawanui, and I was most impressed by him because he'd have surgery at 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. so that the men could come to visit, men-to-men doctors
Yep.
on their way to work.
You've done very well.